welcome to the program. This is the Ecomodernist channel live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Ignetti, Chris Bergen, and our special guest. Amardeo Sarma is an engineer with a degree in electrical engineering. He has been active in the skeptical movement since the mid-1980s. He co-founded GWUP, that's the German Society for the Scientific Investigation of Parasciences, ECSO, the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, and our friends WePlanet. In 2023, together with two others, he founded the nonprofit company Scientific Temper, which promotes scientific thinking, education, and rational solutions to pending problems. He has been a member of the German Social Democratic Party for 45 years. Welcome to the program, Amardeo.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about these organizations that, especially around skepticism and environmentalism. What are sort of the missions of each of these organizations?
So the first one is about the skeptical organizations. At that time, we didn't call it that way, fake news or pseudoscientific claims about a lot of things, like about UFOs, but also about medicine and many other things like that. And we thought that it was about time for there to be a rational response to that, because it seemed that nobody, not the universities, not some of the main radio stations or others, were taking it up. So we said there's got to be a coordinated response to that. So that's when we started off with providing science-based information and all of these claims that were being made that didn't stand up to evidence. That was in the 80s. Then I, in collaboration with some of the people from the US, to get some advice, we founded the European umbrella organization for the skeptics, because in the meanwhile, there had been a lot of organizations of the kind that had been formed in many European countries, but worldwide as well, Australia, New Zealand, and India, and South America as well. So this was really a broad movement, and we were trying to put together the voices in Europe, in the European organization. Now, as a part of this work, I had also started talking about climate change and other challenges that we face in these times, and in the framework of the skeptical organizations. So trying to, show what is the truth behind it, and showing that we really have a problem with anthropogenic global warming. And so in the beginning, I just had one single slide on my talks where I said, why are we then shutting down nuclear power plants? There was a Griffenrheinfall at the time where the German government was trying to shut it down. If that's such a big problem, why are we shutting it down? So then I got more involved in other discussions that were going on. I heard of the Ecomodernist manifesto that was then released, and said, we need to do something about this as well, even for things like environmental challenges and challenges that come with it. For example, how do we keep a good life as well? We then got together in Germany, but in many other European countries as well, to form Ecomodernist groups. And in fact, the initial name of the German society was Ecomodernist, which is ecomodernism. We're talking with many others. We said we need to get one step beyond that and say we want to really have a planet that's livable, both from the point of view for humans and for nature. And that's when we brought these two things together: liberate nature and elevate humanity. So these things should fit together. And one of the basic things behind the eco-modernist thought, but also of WePlanet, is that we need to not just have a functioning planet, but we also need to have humans living in it that can live a decent life. And though we've made a lot of progress through modernity, we are still not there, and we need to do a lot more. So that was basically the founding reason for that. And we then, after that, also set up the overall global organization WePlanet as well, which I was also involved in. One of the big issues is education, so that people learn how to think, not what to think. And that was one of the founding motivations for forming the nonprofit company, and saying we need to start very early. We need to teach children how to think, not what to think, and to maybe ask questions and challenge existing ideas. So that's my background.
Wonderful. That explains a lot into my next question. So why don't you tell us a little more about, is this separation or refinement of eco-modernism What do you think that it is about that focusing more on the planet than the technology? Is that it, or am I missing something else there?
Well, I think we should see that the technologies are tools. So we have very good tools, and that's not just in the area of energy. It's also about feeding everybody in the world, and there too we have a lot of opposition to using new technologies like genetic engineering, even gene editing these days. And when you look at some of the new solutions that are coming up, like precision fermentation or cultivated meat, so there's so many things where we have so much potential from ingenuity, and these are being blocked. And I think that's a very bad thing. And we really need to have a coordinated response to that, and to say we need to have a really good future. A good future means not just a green planet, but also a planet in which all humans can live a decent life.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit about the growth and success of WePlanet. I may, and many may remember, the original branding was RePlanet, and I really appreciate the new WePlanet theme and the new ideas around that. But talk about organizing and what you've been able to accomplish.
I think the at a global level, we've been able to accomplish, for one thing, that we've expanded well beyond just Europe and the Americas. We have countries involved now from South Asia, like Bangladesh, and African countries. And this is really something where we need to listen to the voices that come from these regions, because they know their problems the best. But they follow the same general principles in favor of science-based solutions to these problems. And I think this has been one of the great successes of WePlanet. Beyond that, we've done a lot of other activities, both around promoting nuclear energy as part of the solution of the future, for example. I think we've had quite a bit of success there. And one thing we can say that is, for example, even in Germany, which was terribly anti-nuclear until a short time ago, at least from the point of view of the population, the sentiment has changed in Germany. And now today we have a majority of people who at least at the time wanted to keep the existing nuclear power plants running. But I think much of the fear mongering that has been going on over the last 50 years, I would say, we were able to compensate for part of that so that people don't see the benefits of nuclear energy. And as WePlanet, we don't say we are looking at nuclear energy alone. We say we need to have all solutions and have them combined in a useful way. And this may be different from country to country. Some countries have a lot of hydropower, a lot of water, so they can use that. And we might have quick solutions in African countries using solar, for example. So we should not be dogmatic about it. We should just use all the solutions that we have. And especially for industrial countries like Germany, you need to have power all the time. And we realize that with the Energiewende, which we've been following so far, we've not been able to meet our emissions targets. We also don't have a good running economy based on stable power. So we're kind of missing all the goals, because we just replaced one low carbon energy source with another, which is not doing very much good. And what we always point out to is that if you compare in Europe, especially the countries that have used a mix of all technologies, and usually that includes nuclear power, like France or Sweden, and now even Finland, we see that they are much better off as far as emissions are concerned. And if you really want to solve the problem, we need to use it all. And we have changed the sentiment, I think, in Europe at least. And in Germany, it's going to be a bit more difficult because all the power plants have been shut down. But we're looking at least to stop the dismantling of the nuclear power plants so we can restart them when a future government wants to do so.
That would be amazing. I want to refocus us back on this really severe decision made in Germany that, of course, I've seen over the years many different people compliment the local German economies supporting local businesses with products that are made in Germany. Like if you turn over the plates at the hotels, they'd all say made in Germany.
Right.
But that'll
Yeah.
be disappearing without a stable economy and ability to build locally. How serious is this becoming? Is it to the point where whole economies are beginning to crash? Is there a future to the economic transition without stable power? Or is it that we're going to continue to rely on fossil fuels?
So what I think will really happen is when it comes to it, people will keep fossil fuels running because that's the only way to keep the economy at a good level. But we already see that because of the rise in energy prices in Germany, a lot of companies leaving Germany, or they're trying to move some of their production sites to outside of Germany. And that doesn't mean only to outside of Europe. It means within Europe, even to other countries, better pricing for energy and so on. So there are many other problems also with bureaucracy and other things as well, but it's not a very good situation at the moment. And if you add the energy crisis to the other problems that we have anyway, that's why things are not looking very good at this point, which is also the reason the current government is not in favor anymore.
I understand from many years of activism, especially discussions with Generation Atomic, that we really do want to try to bring back the German nuclear plants. However, the best candidates for reopening have intense local opposition. Even if the nation as a whole is serious about reopening these plants, what do you see other than local opposition, other than parties and building trust with those communities? What's the path forward?
So I think one of the things we really need to get across is that we have multiple crises to solve at the same time, with the environment, with the economy, and people want to just keep up their living standard as they've had so far. And so in a situation like that, we just can't afford to be very choosy about what we do and what we don't do. In some cases, you could say like in food, because in Germany, you can grow a lot of food whatever you do. You don't need to have genetic engineering, for example. But worldwide, this is a problem. But for Germany, especially as far as we look at energy and the environment, I think the only thing we can do is to keep up the pressure so that at some stage we will start building new nuclear power plants, and perhaps also at the same sites where they've been shut down.
Who are some of the groups that were like incubators into your current WePlanet, and are there any other groups that you feel are pretty good at incubating and teaching the public about the underlying truths of the energy situation?
Well, I think there have been many organizations that have now formed WePlanet as an umbrella organization, and many of them have in fact kept the Ecomodernist name because they didn't want to change it, because they've branded their name, so they keep their name at the same time. So it's in fact nothing completely different. It's just that with the overall organization, we're trying to put a slightly different direction, at least as the look and feel of the organization. But it is ecomodernism, if you like. So many of the organizations just stay with their names. And they have had a lot of success. If you look at the Finnish organization, even the Greens support nuclear energy there. So there has been quite a bit of success in changing the minds of people, but things don't change so quickly. So it's going to take time. And I don't have any hope of it changing within the next 2 or 3 years in Germany, for example, but we think over the long run, we'll have to go in a different direction.
And what are your prospects? What are like potential future actions and future focuses for WePlanet?
So on the European level, we try to support all the legislation that opens up the opportunity for nuclear power to become part of the solution of the future. We oppose the appointment of commissioners who've been known to be anti-nuclear. We're hoping to get some success in that as well. So there's a lot at different levels that we can do. And we're very happy to see that many countries are now changing their policy completely on nuclear energy, like France, which had kind of given up on building new power plants. They're changing their point of view. Italy is going to build new nuclear power plants. Poland is going to start new ones. So it's not just Germany. And I think the pressure on Germany is going to mount if they see all the countries around themselves, with perhaps the exception of Austria, opening up to nuclear power plants, and become more and more obvious that we rely on these countries to supply stable energy when we don't have it, when there's no wind or there's no sun. And I think one of the other points is that while I think it's great to have more and more wind and solar, we have to realize that just as any other technology, they also have limitations. Weather doesn't always come up like the demand does. So there's clearly a need to compensate for when you don't have enough wind and solar energy. And that's unfortunately going to be fossil fuels in Germany, I believe, for a long time, because many of the new technologies, great as they are, they're going to be very difficult to scale, like hydrogen and other things as well. So we should actually be promoting those as well. It's just that when many people complain about nuclear power is so slow, which it isn't if you really look at it, but many of the other solutions as backup are probably even slower. And personally, I think, in fact, because many people try to set up, we need to do something by 2030 or 2035, 2040. It'll be a great achievement if by the end of this century we've got down to net zero. Even though I hope, of course, we get to there earlier, but I think it's going to be very, very tough.
Wonderful. Before Chris, I want to follow up. Are you interested or focused on more of the modern medicine and agriculture like GMOs? And I understand EU still has a bit of a controversy over glyphosate and other pesticides. Is that also an ongoing campaign for you?
That's also an ongoing campaign for us as well. That's very clear because we have many of them. In Germany, there are two organizations under the WePlanet umbrella. There's the WePlanet DACH, which is in fact Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, so the German-speaking countries. But we also have the eco-progressives, or eco-progressive as they call themselves. And they've been focused a lot on the agricultural side, and they've been doing excellent work. So we work with them together. So we, as WePlanet DACH, don't focus that much on food because we know there's another organization doing that. But we support them whenever we can. And there's also a great book by one of their leading members, Martin Reich, about the microorganism revolution, saying that we are going from having our food made by big animals to having them being made by bacteria. So that's a very interesting book. And we need to be looking at these solutions as well. So we look at all of these things, everything that helps us create a better future for mankind and to also be good for the planet.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, a minute ago you mentioned this is a century-long process that we are in. I totally agree with that. What are your efforts in educating younger people? Do you have outreaches and educational programs in that regard?
Well, that was one of the reasons that I created this nonprofit company, which is more basically promoting science and how to think rather than what to think. So we should be, of course, clearing up myths and fallacies whenever they come up and showing that they don't stand up to evidence. But at the same time, we should be encouraging, especially young people, on how they should think, that they should critically examine claims irrespective of where they come from. And I'm pretty sure that if you look at the evidence that are the solutions that we are promoting, even though I stand to be corrected, I'm pretty sure that the solutions that we are promoting are better than what the others have been doing so far. And in fact, if you look at some of those other NGOs so far, the green NGOs, they don't focus on human welfare at all directly. If at all, it's a kind of side product. And some of them even go so far as saying that the humans are a menace to the planet. So we don't look at it this way. And that's where we try to differentiate very clearly to them. For us, human beings are important.
That's unfortunately a problem we have in America as well. I'm going to skip ahead just a bit. Has the failure of the Energiewende in Germany had sort of a political influence? Have we seen extreme conservatism take over in the politics? Is that something that you have a personal take on?
Right. I mean, on the one hand, you have the extreme right that go as far as denying the reality of anthropogenic climate change. And they also are, for other reasons, for nuclear power. So they've been on the scene for a while. But I think the more important thing is that if you look back about 5 or 6 years, all the major parties in Germany were in favor of closing down nuclear power plants and having a purely renewable energy future. And now many of the the parties more on the center and center right are changing their minds to become more open to nuclear. That's one side. Unfortunately, not my party, the Social Democratic Party, as yet. But if you talk to people who are younger, and that was another question that was asked, if you talk to people who are below 20 or even below 30, you find that they have a completely different approach to nuclear power. They're not as influenced as maybe my generation was at the time, because they still hold the reins of power, if you like. So if you look at some of the younger people, whether even among the Green Party, among Social Democrats, they have a different view on this. And the only question that we have is it going to take too long and with too many negative side effects for the German economy and for the environment before we really start to take a different course of things?
I sure hope that we see a shift, both in America and in Europe. And I'm a little inspired by the young people, especially because they have a better grounding in science than we seem to have had in the past. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of the LNT hypothesis, the idea that radiation is a cumulative dose that will infect the germline of a species and destroy the stability of the genetics. Has that ever been a idea that stood up to scrutiny? Is that something that we can apply sort of a skeptical mind to the development of this hypothesis to?
Yeah, so I think there are two aspects to this. One is that for many companies or for organizations, it looks like a reasonable thing to do is to reduce radiation as much as you can. But that's a different question. Yes, we should be doing that. Rather than going the other way around and taking the LNT hypothesis, for example, to calculate the number of deaths due to whether it's Fukushima or Chernobyl or many other things as well. All those claims tend to be wrong, at least as far as the evidence shows so far. We don't see any rise except for leukemia in the case of Chernobyl, and in the case of Fukushima, it appears there's going to be no deaths at all because of radiation. So that's quite clear that the fear that has been instilled over 50, 60, 70 years is still affects a lot of people who think that they're going to be harmed by even low levels of radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the arguments that I use the most is you probably have a bigger change of radiation when you move from one town to the other, either in one or the other direction, than if you're going to have a nuclear power plant next door, right? And even if you look at anything beyond the real neighborhood of the nuclear power plants in Fukushima and Chernobyl, you don't see any long-term effects at all. Which is a completely different question is the economic effects that these have had, which have been tremendous, both real and to some extent driven by fear, by relocating too many people in Fukushima, if you look at it in hindsight. And even in Chernobyl, not as many people would need to have been relocated. And one of the other arguments that show pretty well that this is being highly exaggerated is if you go to the Chernobyl exclusion zone and see how wildlife is thriving there again. So except for the immediate vicinity of the nuclear power plant where the accident happened, life is going on again. It's just that the humans are not there, which has been good for the wildlife in a way.
America had our own crisis in Pennsylvania in a place called 3 Mile Island, where
Right.
we very, very poorly communicated the status of the plant, the risk to the surrounding public. And this is when the political fear over nuclear energy was at an all-time high. And it encouraged a massive evacuation and public panic. And to this day, there has been misinformation about this site, which is thankfully one of the two reactors is coming back online to serve our energy demands. And so I'm both hopeful that we see better information about this. As well, I'm concerned that we're going to see backlash as plants like this start to reopen and we get more service returning in Japan. What's sort of your view of this forward and backward progress that we keep making? What's the path forward?
Right. So from what I see, I think the US is doing a lot better than Germany. So they are reopening some plants like you just mentioned, and at least the current government seems to be in favor of nuclear power as well, as far as I can see. So that's a completely different situation than we have here. In Japan, also, I worked for a Japanese company for a long time, so I'm very happy to see Japanese nuclear power plants being opened up again. What many people haven't realized is that very often closing down these nuclear power plants, that has had real health effects. People have been relocated and the stress that has been created by that. But because more fossil fuels have had to be used to compensate for that, there are some very interesting studies by where James Hansen was also involved in, for example. But because of shutting down the power plants in Japan and in Germany, far more people have died because of the increased pollution than ever by radiation. And I think these are the things that are not well known enough. And it's going to take a long time to remove the fear that has been instilled over more than half a century in many of the countries of the West. In nuclear medicine, people immediately realize the benefits for themselves, that they are going to benefit from nuclear medicine, that they're going to benefit from having these genetic engineered insulin or what else that they would like to have. So that's an immediate positive response. Whereas in the case of both agriculture and nuclear power plants, it's somewhere else. It's the farmers doing it. It's the nuclear power plants doing it. So the benefits, which I think we should be focusing on much more, they don't get through so quickly. So if at all, I would say we should stop talking so much about the negative effects and just say, well, there are negative effects of many things that we do, but we should look at the positives that we can get. How quickly can we really decarbonize, use nuclear? And how do we bust some of the myths like nuclear is so expensive? If we are just doing a study about that in Germany to see what are the scenarios that would work with nuclear and compare them with just a renewables scenario. And the initial results tend to show that nuclear, including nuclear power in the mix, is going to improve it on almost all fronts. And this kind of study has not been done at all in Germany. And we hope to come up with the final results by the end of the year. And this is part of the contribution to saying, if you want to have a stable economy with low emissions, we need to have nuclear power in the mix.
I definitely look forward to it. I remember, I think it was Jenkins Sepulveda around 2018 did that for the East Coast, the US. And it is really amazing to show that just a little bit of clean baseload or firm baseload will massively increase the value of the energy produced by renewables. Exactly. Those renewables have a window of delivery, and having some storage shifts that window of delivery. But having a baseload energy, that fills in an enormous amount of potential gap. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this research.
One of the objections that we've had is, why has this not been done before? Because any government that's interested in solving both the problems surrounding climate change, but also providing a cheap and affordable energy to everybody, which is part of having a good life. But it's got to be done using solar and wind only, or renewable energy only. And they've spent so much money doing these things. With some of the assumptions that are made there, we've looked at some of those results are really unrealistic, very unrealistic about setting up both how quickly they get up the hydrogen economy and how quickly they will be able to build these new transmission lines from the north to the south. When you talk about a long time that is needed for nuclear, these things are going to take much longer than building new nuclear power plants, for which we have the infrastructure already. We have the transmission lines in place, so we could replace at the same places where there are coal power plants today with not so much change. We could build nuclear power plants to run at those sites. So there are a lot of ideas about how we can do that without incurring this extra cost of building a completely new network for transmission.
Great. Go ahead, Chris.
How do you reach out to people who are more emotionally based, who are emotionally attached to other ideas and they're afraid to let them go?
That's another very tough question, because the more it goes down to your very basic values, the more difficult it's going to be. What are these values that we are talking about? I mean, of course, we want to have a functioning planet, but also with some of the very basic needs. We're not there yet in many parts of the world. And even in countries like Germany, I'm sure the United States as well, there's a lot of people who still don't have enough. So we need, especially if you're looking at it from a more, I would say, kind of social democratic point of view or, leftist point of view, you need to have people that are well fed and have sufficiently high standards of living anywhere in the world. This is another value. It's not just one thing against the other. We have to balance a lot of different conflicting things. And we need to talk about what's the best solution in this direction. But I think those who are really ideologically committed in this direction are not the majority anymore, at least. So it's even those who are against nuclear power, they are so because they've heard that it might be dangerous here or there. We can convince them. There's going to be a small minority, like in many other things, you will never convince those who are religious fundamentalists in some place, some way or the other. You're not going to convince them, but you have to address the majority. And for those who are slightly skeptical, make them a bit more positive. And so not trying to convince the real hardliners.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate the connection to skepticism. I see in the left in America, we also find a constellation of beliefs, and this reminds me of constellations of conspiracies. One's unsure about fluoride, and then that cascades into medicine and agriculture and living off the land and eating raw milk, and this is it is infectious in terms of a false confidence,
Right.
and it's all built on this shared narrative of mistrust and acting against a hidden interest out there.
Right.
Is this something that we can break down with education? Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I think if you encourage people to look at the evidence, what has worked so far, I mean, it's pretty clear. If you look at how quickly nuclear power plants have been built, how quickly it's decarbonized, all of this speaks up in favor of nuclear energy. So we should just encourage, especially young people, to say, look at where the evidence is. Listen to the viewpoints of the others as well, of course. But try to see which one stands up to reality more than the others. And another point that you did bring up indirectly is that the question of those big companies that are kind of dictating us to use fossil fuels or nuclear power or GMOs or whatever, is that you can go about this differently. For example, the author in Germany, Anna Veronika Wendland, has written a book about pro-nuclear. She comes from the left. And she says, well, yes, perhaps you don't let you have nuclear power plants that are not run by huge companies, but you have functioning plant by the workers and by the engineers who are running them as well. So we can look at different concepts as far as that is concerned. So it's not the same thing. What kind of economic structure you have, how these companies are kind of set up, is a completely different question from having to use nuclear power. And if you look back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, most left-wing governments, social democrats and others were in favor of nuclear power. It's just, I don't know how this has come about that they've been taken over by this thinking that nuclear power is so massively dangerous. At the same time, I don't think it should be a left versus right fight here, because first of all, let's agree that we need to have nuclear power to solve the problems, and the best economic way to do that, we need to look at the solutions that we have and maybe try out some new ones. So that it's not whether you're a Democrat or Republican, or whether you're a social or Christian Democrat or a liberal in Germany, or even a left-wing or green person. You need to be looking at the issues at hand and try to find the best solutions. Try to get it outside the polarization front. And unfortunately, Germany's been pretty bad in that front, at least as far as nuclear energy is concerned, because nuclear energy is seen as a right-wing issue instead of being looked at as a problem to solve. And that's been more in Germany than in many other countries where we see left-wing parties in support of nuclear power. So I think that's a big thing big issue we face specifically in Germany. And I hope other countries are out of it. And I'm very happy to see that in the US, at least, it doesn't seem to be that much of a partisan issue.
The big fear for Americans will be the extreme right taking back the government and perhaps throwing the baby out with the bathwater, of scrapping this thing we call the Inflation Reduction Act and our infrastructure investments that happen there, and seeing this sabotaged by extremism, unfortunately, that would be a tragedy. We saw some of our international cooperations sabotaged similarly 6 or 7 years ago, and this has set back various investments and research projects, and I'm honestly concerned that we'll face something like that again in the future. Though, even if nuclear at the surface is held up as, oh, it's a solution, why don't you progressives and Democrats take on nuclear as a solution? Well, we have, and now you've destroyed it again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we have to live with is there are going to be ups and downs, and it may be at different stages in different parts of the world. But if we have the overall direction clear towards finding good solutions and being also, I mean, I think one of the things we should be defending is modernity, the modern world, which has changed everything since the last 200 years. If you look at, I'm fascinated by Hans Rosling. I don't know if you've seen his talks about how the world has changed and that people look at the world much more negatively than it really is. So we need more Hans Roslings in for the future as well, to show that the world that we have come to, with all its drawbacks that we have, has clearly given us more advantages than drawbacks.
Wonderful. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike will be closing out shortly. I wanted to ask on WePlanet, I know recently you've added Australia to the WePlanet umbrella. Are there other areas that have been recently added or areas you're hoping to get into that you don't yet have a footprint in?
So we are hoping to get a couple of more African and Asian countries. That's going to take a while. We already have Uganda. We have, I think, Kenya's involved as well, and South Africa. So at least there are individuals from these countries who are working in this direction. So I think Africa is going to be a major place for change as well. So if we get the right solutions there, I think they're much more open to, for example, genetic engineering than much of the rich West is, if you like, because they face the problems from day to day and they see the potential of these solutions much more than we do. There's been a lot of great success in Bangladesh, for example, with genetically engineered aubergine. So there is a lot of positives going on in many parts of the world, and I think it's an important thing to get these things together. It's going to take a while because we need to find people who think the way we think in these places as well, but we are finding them. Slowly, but we're finding them.
So I want to make sure to give you plenty of time to introduce any other topics, any other promotions that you've got going on. Thank you so much for all of your answers. It's been an honor to sort of connect back up with WePlanet co-founder Amardeo Sarma. Thank you so much. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Well, I think what I can just say is support science and critical thinking wherever you can find it. WePlanet is a wonderful organization to support, and if there are international listeners, viewers anywhere in the world, think about forming an organization like that as well to get humanity forward. That's very important, I think. And support, for example, the projects like we are working on this study on including nuclear in the future of Germany. We are still looking for funding for that because we've done one phase of the project, but we want to do more. So if anyone wants to kind of sponsor that kind of thing, we're looking for donations and sponsors for future projects in Germany, but beyond as well.
I think it's been a great talk. And thank you, everyone, for your contributions, your comments, and thank you again to Amardeo Sarma. This has been the Ecomodernist Channel Live. We broadcast right here on YouTube at Ecomodernist 1, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Also on my personal x.com account, Carl Alex Pauls. You can find us on Twitch at Soyaddle or soyaddle.tv. You can find us on Facebook at the Ecomodernist Society of North America and online at esna.earth. That's ESNA.earth. If you can, please support us at the Ecomodernist channel on patreon.com. And remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.